United States President Donald Trump's tariff moves against Canada, Mexico, and China have accelerated the global agenda. As you know, Canada and Mexico face tariffs of 25%, while China faced tariffs of up to 60% on some products. Europe was next in line for Donald Trump.
European leaders are expected to discuss Donald Trump's latest tariff threats as they gather today in Brussels for a meeting on defense.
There are growing fears of a major global trade war tonight after President Trump announced sweeping tariffs.
So the UK is way out of line, and we'll see the UK, but European Union is really out of line.
C'est simple, nous on pense que la priorité elle est à cet agenda stratégique et sécurité de nos frontières, et si nous étions attaqués sur des sujets commerciaux.
This time, Trump directed his tariff decisions towards the European Union.
Will definitely happen with the European Union, I can tell you that, because they've really taken advantage of us. And
the United States president claimed that the EU tariffs would be announced very soon, and that the United Kingdom would have to work on this issue for a while. These shocking statements caused great concern among EU member states. While the EU group was evaluating the situation in the face of Trump's tax announcements, French President Emmanuel Macron took a critical counterstep.
Et si nous étions attaqués sur des sujets commerciaux, l'Europe, comme une puissance qui se tient, devra se faire respecter.
Emmanuel Macron shared statements on tariffs that probably even Donald Trump would not have expected. We will now discuss the full details of these important messages from Macron. We will also discover how other EU member states reacted to Macron's statements. But first, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay up to date with our content. Let's get started. As EU leaders called for talks in response to Donald Trump's threat of heavy tariffs, French President Emmanuel Macron made an unexpected surprise. The French leader made statements that member states would be able to counter United States tariffs in the event of an attack on EU interests. Speaking on the sidelines of the informal EU defense summit in Brussels, Emmanuel Macron stressed that if the United States picks up the pace on trade issues, Europe, as a surviving power, must ensure that it is respected and therefore react. Macron called for a stronger and more united response to global trade pressures.
C'est simple, nous on pense que la priorité elle est à cet agenda stratégique et sécurité de nos frontières, et si nous étions attaqués sur des sujets commerciaux.
The French leader underlined that Europe must strengthen its industrial and technological infrastructure, increase defense spending, and adopt a strategic economic approach to reduce dependence on foreign powers. He also advocated an action plan that includes increasing public and private sector financing, reforming the financing mechanisms of the European Investment Bank, and prioritizing European industry in procurement decisions. Emmanuel Macron called on EU partners to parallel France's efforts to expand defense investments, saying that Europe must act together in key sectors. These statements were seen as a retaliatory move by Macron at a time of growing concerns over trade tensions with the United States following the inauguration of President Donald Trump. In other words, French President Emmanuel Macron was already making preparations against United States President Donald Trump's tariff rhetoric against Europe. Marc Ferracci, the French industry minister, argued that trade talks with Washington should include some kind of power dynamic. According to Marc Ferracci, to be effective, any response would have to focus on products that are important to the United States and be hard-hitting. François Villeroy de Galhau, governor of the Bank of France, said that the tariffs already imposed by Trump were draconian. François Villeroy de Galhau said that these tariffs will increase economic uncertainty and are a worrying development. The EU group also discussed the issue in more detail. Kaja Kallas, the bloc's foreign policy chief, said there would be no winners in a trade war. European Council President Antonio Costa reported that EU member states agreed with North Atlantic Treaty Organization Secretary-General Mark Rutte that a stronger defense Europe would also strengthen the transatlantic partnership. Mark Rutte said that the United States sells much more defense equipment to Europe than vice versa, and that there is a lot of money floating around, and more to come as European NATO allies increase their defense spending. In Mr. Rutte's assessment, as defense spending increases, the United States stands to gain much more, and Donald Trump will have a much stronger hand in the tariff competition. European countries also backed French leader Emmanuel Macron's stance against United States tariffs, suggesting that the EU grouping should do more on the issue.
Austausch von Dienstleistungen. Wenn jetzt Zollpolitik das schwierig macht, dann wäre das schlecht für die USA, schlecht für Europa.
German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that the EU is strong enough to react to any United States trade tariffs, but their aim is to pave the way for cooperation.
I think that we have to do everything to avoid this totally unnecessary and stupid tariff wars or trade wars.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who believes that Europe and the United States need each other, emphasized that a trade war is a mistake and that everything possible should be done to prevent allies from fighting in the face of the Russian threat or Chinese expansionism. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said that Copenhagen would never support a war with allies in general. But if the Trump administration imposes tough tariffs on Europe, it will face a collective and strong response. On the other hand, the leaders called for more dialogue with Washington amid rising tensions over tariff competition and the failure to fully resolve the issues.
In our view, protectionism more generally will harm citizens, no matter where they reside, and that tariff.
Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin said that the EU and the United States should work together constructively on trade because protectionism hurts citizens wherever they live. Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo said that Europe should negotiate with Trump on trade. Petteri Orpo added that the biggest threat to Europe is Russia.
Today, I think that it's not enough to have a banking union, we also need to have a defense union.
Luxembourg Prime Minister Luc Frieden said that the answer to trade tariffs is to respond with the same measures, but that tariffs are always bad. Spanish Economy Minister Carlos Cuerpo said that the EU is open to trade and in favor of a globalized market. However, Carlos Cuerpo argued that the parties should not be naive and will protect their companies to ensure that they can compete on a level playing field. EU leaders were generally supportive of French President Emmanuel Macron's statements, but their primary position was that the tariff crisis should be resolved through dialogue. Emmanuel Macron, on the other hand, has been the most outspoken EU leader in recent days on Donald Trump's plans to impose tariffs on the EU. So, after Macron's statements, if Trump decides to impose more tariffs instead of reaching an agreement with France, how will this affect the future of the two countries? In fact, contrary to expectations, relations between the United States and France have recently deteriorated considerably. The two countries were already tense before Donald Trump announced his tariffs on the EU. This is because on the first day of his second term, Donald Trump signed a series of executive orders withdrawing the United States from the Paris Climate Change Agreement and the World Health Organization. With these moves, Trump had already signaled that he was about to blow cold winds. France and the United States were on very good terms in 2007. Political relations between France and the United States became friendlier after Nicolas Sarkozy was elected president of France in 2007. Dubbed the American Sarko, Sarkozy claimed at the time that he was proud of his nickname. After Sarkozy, relations between the United States and France continued to deteriorate. On July 12, 2017, United States President Donald Trump visited France at the invitation of President Emmanuel Macron. In April 2018, after Macron addressed the United States Congress and expressed his desire for the United States to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement to curb climate change, United States Congressman Thomas Massie suggested that Macron was a socialist militarist, globalist science alarmist. In late 2018, Trump mocked Macron over nationalism, tariffs, France's World War II defeat, plans for a European army, and the French leader's approval ratings. This followed Trump's Armistice Day visit to Paris, which was heavily criticized both in France and in the United States. In December, Macron criticized Trump for his decision to withdraw United States troops from Syria. In April 2019, France's outgoing ambassador to the United States, Gérard Araud, described the Trump administration and the United States as isolated. In November 2019, Macron questioned the United States' commitment to Europe. Now, Donald Trump's latest move to impose tariffs on the EU has further strained ties between the United States and France. Although the two countries have had a bumpy relationship so far, Trump's tariff decision may bring disadvantages for both the United States and France. In order to understand these downsides more clearly, it is necessary to consider the economic ties between the two countries prior to Trump's decision to impose tariffs. France and the United States had a deep, mutually beneficial economic relationship. After French-American trade rebounded significantly following the COVID-19 pandemic, reaching record highs in 2022, trade declined in 2023, largely due to falling energy prices and lower French beverage exports and cruise ship activity. Still, bilateral trade levels remained higher than before the pandemic. Although there were no serious problems between the United States and France, economic fluctuations worried the two countries. Trade in goods between the two countries reached 97 billion euros in 2023, down 12.4 billion euros from 2022. French customs figures show that in all main categories of products, imports and exports fell. While France's trade surplus came at 15.9 billion euros, trade in services rose by around 2% in 2023, reaching 70.4 billion euros. French imports of services rise by 1.7% to 27.3 billion euros, and exports of goods by 1.7% to 43.2 billion euros correspondingly. In both cases, down one place from the year before, the United States was France's fourth biggest consumer and fifth biggest supplier in 2023. Following 4 years of surpluses, the bilateral trade balance dropped modestly to a deficit of 13.3 billion euros in 2022, which was negative once more. The 2023 deficit came at 6.6 billion euros. Aeronautical industry, medicines, and beverages drove French exports to the United States in 2023. Comparatively to 2022, all three categories of commodities fell, particularly beverage exports, which dropped by 1 billion euros or 20.6%, broke records in terms of drop. Furthermore, among the sectors with the biggest drop in exports were cruise ships and ships including pharmaceuticals. Driven by rising wind turbine exports, general-purpose machinery and tools ranked fourth behind cosmetics and perfumes. Although the United States and France's economic ties have been rising and then declining as witnessed, the economic dynamics have been preserved free from any conflict between the two nations. But today, given Donald Trump's actions, additional economic issues between France and the United States are to be anticipated. This might compel France to search for other economic alliances. Which nation, therefore, might France choose above the United States? With high-level talks, cooperation agreements, and mutual commitments on world events, China's and France's ties have greatly changed in recent years. The visit of French President Emmanuel Macron to Beijing in April 2023 was a significant turning point in Sino-French ties. New agreements were signed during the visit, together signifying a strengthened bond. Specifically, both nations urged the world community to handle the spillover consequences in several spheres and promised to assist in resolving the Ukrainian crisis by means of discussion. After this conference, more specifics surfaced showing Chinese President Xi Jinping's appreciation of the favorable influence of their economic relations. By signing 18 cooperation agreements on behalf of French and Chinese businesses, officials showed a fresh optimism and underlined the advantages of contact. On his first trip to Europe in 5 years a year later, in May 2024, Xi met Macron in Haute-Pyrénées, France. Their discussions addressed a broad spectrum of world issues, therefore reinforcing mutual pledges to improve ties not only between China and France, but also with the European Union. While Macron underlined the need of preserving Europe's strategic independence while developing stronger relations with China, Xi underlined China's dedication to national unity and cross-cultural contacts with France, reflecting collaborative efforts to improve collaboration and stabilize world affairs. These recent events highlight the increasing relevance of Sino-French ties on the world scene. Actually, early history of the two nations revealed somewhat more varied interactions. Starting in the 17th century, France and China share a rich and complicated past. France was rather heavily traded in China in the 19th and early 20th centuries. After France acknowledged Taiwan, relations sank in the middle of the 20th century, and diplomatic connections were suspended. France restored diplomatic ties with China in 1964, and since then both nations have often conducted high-level negotiations. Different agreements have been formed and relationships strengthened. Still, political systems and beliefs have caused difficulties for the alliance. The issues dividing France from China have been less noticeable in recent times. The founding of the Franco-Chinese Strategic Alliance in 2004, which seeks to foster collaboration in sectors like trade, business, culture, and education, was one significant change in the relationship. This cooperation improved relations between the two nations and opened the path for more general collaboration in many spheres. Signing the China-France Joint Declaration on Climate Change in 2015, both nations underlined their will to solve world warming and advance sustainable development. The negotiations leading to the Paris Agreement on climate change later that year were much aided by this joint announcement. French President Emmanuel Macron has given boosting economic and cultural connections between France and China top priority since assuming office in 2017. Given France's economic development and worldwide impact depend on its relationship with China, Macron has underlined its significance. Macron signed numerous deals on nuclear energy, agriculture, and tourism, with Chinese officials on his first official trip to China in January 2018. Along with pushing China to act specifically to solve trade imbalances and market access concerns, the French president also supported further cooperation between Europe and China. Notwithstanding various difficulties such as the COVID-19 epidemic and France's early opposition to China's Belt and Road Initiative, economic relations between the two nations kept becoming stronger. China became France's top foreign investment source in 2019. The two nations negotiated deals covering a broad spectrum, including green finance, intellectual property rights, and civil aviation. The figures likewise indicated the better ties between France and China. In 2021, trade volumes between the two nations peaked at never-seen levels. China's Ofcom claims that bilateral trade has grown about 800 times in the 6 decades from the official founding of diplomatic ties between the two nations, bringing $78.9 billion United States dollars in 2023. China has become France's most significant trading partner outside of the European Union, but France keeps its crucial role as a major trade ally for China inside the European Union. France's bilateral sectoral deficit with China grew notably from €1.1 billion in 2022 to €2.92 billion in 2023. This meant that France imported from China more goods and services than it exported back into France. The rise in the trade imbalance indicated a rising reliance on Chinese goods on the French market. Conversely, the United Nations Comtrade International Trade Database estimates that China's overall import from France will be $37.33 billion United States dollars in 2023. This increase signaled China's larger economic recovery and market opening, therefore indicating a possible change in the commercial relationship between France and China. Leading exports from China to France in 2023 were electrical and electronic equipment, machinery, energy components, boilers, furniture, lighting signs, prefabricated buildings, goods of unknown type, and vehicles other than trams. The final line is that all this makes abundantly evident that France has an alternative partner in China over United States tariffs. Given Donald Trump's increasing pressure on the European Union on tariffs, Emmanuel Macron's latest concerned and forceful remarks boost the likelihood that France will engage more in exports and imports with China. This is seen as a major threat to both the United States and the EU. For this reason, experts believe that the tariff crisis between the EU and the United States should be resolved primarily through dialogue rather than retaliation. It remains to be seen which scenario will be realized in this tariff crisis between the United States and the EU. Thank you for watching.